Welcome back on BMI, Bicara Minggu Ini, and continuing the next episode of the Malaysian Women in Journalism series. This is the second part of Breaking the Newsroom, Discrimination and Sexism. In the last episode, I talked about how women journalists and editors face much discrimination and sexism in the course of their work in the newsroom, from an angle of a broadcast journalist. In this episode, I'm delighted to have Su-Lyn, Editor-in-Chief of Code Blue, an independent health news portal with the Galen Centre for Health and Social Policy. Welcome to the show, Su-Lyn.
Thanks, Norman.
I know it's weekend and it's pretty hard to come out. So how's the day for you?
It's been great. Yeah, pretty relaxing day because I try not to work on weekends.
Yeah, and it has been a crazy week since the start of the parliament 2 weeks ago. And last week, we're never short of dramas and wayangs by the politicians.
Yep.
So, can you share a little bit with our listeners a background about yourself?
Okay, my name is Su-Lyn. I am editor-in-chief and co-founder of Code Blue, which is an independent health news website that is under the Galen Centre for Health and Social Policy. So I co-founded Code Blue last year, and we focus exclusively on important healthcare issues and policies in Malaysia and around the world. So we do original reporting on issues here in Malaysia because our very tiny editorial team is based here. But we also keep track on what's happening regionally or around the world on important healthcare issues. So since the COVID-19 pandemic broke out here in January, we have been focusing a lot of our coverage on COVID-19.
How many people are there in your editorial?
So there's me, and I currently have an intern who's helping out. She's pretty great, and I also have another full-time health writer coming soon in August.
So what was it like when you started your work in the newsroom? That's like how many years ago?
Oh, that was really long ago, Norman. I started my journalism career in 2010 at the Malaysian Insider. So I started out as a political reporter. We reported a lot about national politics and socio-political issues. And then in 2013, I moved to what was then known as the Malay Mail Online. And then after that, Malay Mail Online rebranded itself to become the Malay Mail. Yeah.
You know, in the report by the International Federation of Journalists on Malaysian Media and Gender Report in March 2015, it was, I think it's 5 years ago, showed that women are more primarily employed in newspapers at 54%, while only 5.7% work in television. How things have changed over the past decade for women in the newsroom?
Yeah. Wait, so you're asking me how have
things changed since you first started? Although at the time when you started, it was at the Malaysian Insider. Yeah. I mean, when you talk to friends and when you look at your own newsroom itself, how have things changed? Do you see more women in the newsroom these days?
I think there have always been more women in the newsroom, in the editorial teams. So I don't think that has changed much. So yeah, I don't have stats, but I think women do form the majority of journalists in Malaysia.
So do on that note though, although there are more women in among the reporters, but when it comes to senior leadership and decision making, we barely see many women in the editorial leadership. I mean, you are among the very, very few editor-in-chief even in news portals.
Yeah, that's because I started my own news site.
You see, it has to take women to actually start on their own. The problem is the male dominance in the editorial decision shaped the narrative of news reporting more often as gender bias against women. What do you say about that? You know, you've been covering politics and how this sort of male dominance in editorial has shaped the narratives of covering of women.
So I'm not sure if there's a correlation between male dominance in the editorial leadership and the fact that we see a lot more men portrayed in the media. I think it's more like it's simply because newsmakers. So in politics, our newsmakers would typically be politicians and lawmakers, right? In other fields, also like in healthcare, which I'm currently in right now, most of my newsmakers will be doctors, medical practitioners, and also lawmakers, because we focus on the public health aspects of various issues in Malaysia. So when you have majority male newsmakers, then you also tend to have, an overrepresentation of men in the media, right? Because it's not just politicians, medical practitioners, lawmakers, but even so-called experts, so like medical experts or political analysts. A lot of them are men. Very few women, right? So I think that is really the main factor that leads to overrepresentation of men in the media.
Yeah, this is also in line with how the society look at, and then they are not in that support of empowering women in more decision-making positions in the country, not just in the newsroom.
Correct. So that reflects in media coverage as well, because when we report on things happening around the world, and when we report on major government decisions, whether it's government decisions or decisions in the private sector, a lot of those on the top are all men. So I try to at least make sure that I have female newsmakers. So when we do interviews with medical experts and such, I do tend to ensure that we have at least one female voice, especially if it's on things that affect primarily women. And you know that in the area of health, women are actually more health conscious than men. And yet, majority of medical experts are men. So I try to have that balance, and because when we're talking about health issues and they affect women are the ones who should be speaking out and advising us on these health issues.
This is also remember one of the controversial appointment of the family planning unit is headed by a male MP.
Exactly.
And previously it was a health. She's an expert in family planning.
Dr. Narima, she's.
Exactly.
I mean, she has her credentials are just pages long. She has done so much work in maternal and child health for decades. She retired from the MOH. She's been advising the World Health Organization in the region about these reproductive health, maternal, child health issues. She's just done so much work, right? Compared to her successor, whose only qualification is he's an MP.
He's an MP. He's a club, sports club patron and all that. But when it comes to that, at that point though, most stories are skewed or insensitive towards women, sometimes to a point of using very degrading and sexist headlines.
Such as what?
For example, not just a beauty queen, and so is a woman is gearing towards a political arena. So what does beauty queen have to do with a political a person joining a political arena?
Right.
Yeah, that's just one example.
Sure. Yeah.
Or another story about a lady who's willing to take up jobs being a pump assistant. Media is portraying about her beauty. So what does beauty have to do with it? Then again, this is a some of them would say very subtle objectification, sexual objectification towards women. Well, it happens to men as well. But are we doing enough to address this sort of gender bias and very degrading attributes towards women in reporting?
So maybe that could be shaped by the fact that there are more male editors rather than female editors. So maybe women editors wouldn't put such angles or headlines in their stories, because really, what does beauty have anything to do with anything, right? We should be talking about our qualifications rather than our physical attributes. So maybe if we had more women in the editorial leadership, we would see fewer of such sexist stories.
When we try to call out some of our friends in the press from different organizations in the way of reporting women generally, because that would definitely shape the narratives of how we portray women in the society. It's like how when TV dramas portray women on TV, and most of the time, I think to my shock, I mean, this is also the first time when I watched television during MCO, and I got caught in a rude shock where it's so normal for TV stations to portray domestic violence on TV.
Right.
So,
and they portray it as just...
It's normal.
Right.
So it's like the same on news reporting as well. And coincidentally, this year marks the 25th anniversary of the United Nations Fourth World Conference on Women that was held in Beijing 25 years ago, focusing on platform for action, and Malaysia was part of it.
Yeah.
So in this convention, just to share with you, it highlighted about women and media and listed two key strategic actions, namely, number one, increase the participation and access of women to expression and decision-making in and through the media and new technologies of communication. And number two, promote a balanced and non-stereotype portrayal of women in the media.
Right.
How far have we come after 25 years?
I don't think we've come very far at all. Because media is a reflection of society. So, you know how journalists, we want to report important things, but there are also some things that we report which may not be all that important, but it's what the public wants. So you see, there's that relationship there. So if the public keeps demanding for sensational stories that play up women's physical attributes and doesn't really explain domestic violence all that well, then sometimes the media kind of gives in to what the public wants and gives them what they want.
This reminds me of one of the data of the audience I've seen over the past few years when I've still in a newsroom, and across all major newspapers, irrespective of language, all three language in fact, the top three, I think you guessed it right, it's called 3S. In Malay, it's called sex, scandal, and celebrity.
Right.
I remember arguing with one of the senior editors to say, look out for stories that we can sell. Are we selling stories right now instead of informing public?
Yeah, so that's a tough decision. You see right now, especially in the Malay media, there's so many stories on like this person taking off a tudung or this person posting a photo of herself on Instagram wearing a low-cut top, and that's news. But yet at the same time, even if I don't think that's newsworthy, but the fact that article may get thousands of shares,
tens and
clicks,
thousands sometimes,
right? Or even tens of thousands, right? That means people read this shit, and I don't know what to say, Norma. I feel like as a media, there has to be a balance, right? So sure, we want to cater to the public by giving in to their basest desires, but at the same time, we also have a responsibility to inform them on what we think is important. So I think we have to make that decision sometimes. Yeah. So a particular story may not be all that popular, but we may feel like it's an important story to be told, even if it's not as popular as a celebrity showing off her boobs.
Yeah, or wearing tight shirts.
Yeah.
Or sometimes wearing very decent clothes and still get those comments.
Yeah.
And this is just the tip of the iceberg. And we have also seen seen and heard of a lot of our friends. They're being on the ground reporting. And what among the stereotypes you have experienced or heard or seen our friends towards women in journalism? How will you suggest addressing them?
Well, my former colleague in Malay Mail, Yuswari, you interviewed her recently.
Yeah.
So she was sexually harassed at a protest. I've also heard stories of other women who have been sexually harassed or sexually propositioned by newsmakers, by male newsmakers.
Even in the parliament, receiving those very inappropriate messages from them.
Correct. Yeah, I think there was a report. I think a couple of years ago about how a journalist said that lawmaker sexually propositioned her and really made her uncomfortable. So those are some of the challenges that women in journalism face. I don't know what would be the solution. If we have, because as already as it is, I believe there are more women than men journalists in Malaysia, but at the same time, most of the newsmakers are men. So as long as we have an overwhelming majority of male newsmakers, then I think it's a bit hard to stop this problem. I mean, we have to educate men that it's not cool to act like a jerk and to come on to a female reporter just because she's a woman. And we had more women newsmakers. That would definitely go a long way in solving the problem.
So it would be good too. I mean, among female journalists to come together. It's time to speak up. And then we have seen a lot of very courageous women coming out on social media and sharing their Me Too experiences, knowing that there will be obstacles, there will be a societal reaction to that, saying that, are you putting yourself in danger by sharing your story? But this, I think, it gives strength to people and others who have suffered in silence. So what are among obstacles in addressing this sort of gender equality issues, particularly in newsrooms in Malaysia? So what are barriers of having more women in editorial leadership? Now, we have more women as reporters.
Yeah.
What's stopping them to be editors?
I don't know. I think that it's probably the same in any other field, whether it's politics or medicine or business. There's still the glass ceiling. We haven't broken it yet. I'm not even sure if we've made more than a few cracks in the glass ceiling in Malaysia. Because being a journalist, well, it's tough, right? You have to put in a lot of hours. Your hours are uncertain. You will work overtime a lot. So if you're a young woman who has a young family, it might be a bit tough to commit to that. And so, of course, if you don't put in the work, then you may not be given the opportunity to climb the ladder to become an editor. And then there's also the problem of, I don't know whether this applies to all newsrooms, but some newsrooms may have people who are already editors and they are just staying there for a really long time, right? So the only way you can move up is if they retire. So that's another tough thing as well, because how long do you have to stay as a reporter or an assistant news editor before you can move up if there's no vacancy for you to begin with?
And we have a lot of dinosaurs in the newsroom who refuse to take new ideas.
Exactly. We have a lot of old men leading newsrooms. Stubborn old men who think that they know everything and they haven't yet adapted to the new world. So this is perhaps one of the reasons why young women are unable to advance further to be editors, news editors, or editor-in-chief.
Now, going back to you, being an editor-in-chief and starting, it is, I would say Code Blue is new, but it's making a lot of headlines. I mean, it got you in the hot soup, right, with the ministry. But your stories, I mean, it's just making a lot of headlines. It's not just making headlines, it's making changes to the society.
I hope so.
I think it will, for a start. And how has it been being in the editor-in-chief?
Right. So when I made a jump from being an assistant news editor to a full-time editor-in-chief of a news portal that I created, that I co-founded, it has been quite a change because as editor-in-chief, you have to make a lot of decisions, right? It's not just being a reporter and wanting to report everything you can and then being frustrated when your editors sometimes kill your stories out of political considerations, right? I used to be really frustrated by that because I felt like we should be able to report whatever we want, screw those political considerations. So now that I'm on the other side as an editor, and then I have to make those decisions on whether to kill stories or not because of political pressure. So I will say that Code Blue is independent in the sense that we get our funding and revenue mostly from doing work with the private sector. So it's like sponsored articles, advertisements. We recently also got a grant from the Google News Initiative's
Congratulations on that.
Thanks. Journalism Emergency Relief Fund for COVID-19. So that's great. That all helps. And we also did a successful fundraising for Code Blue in February this year just before COVID went full blast. So because of that, we're not tied to any political parties, to any politicians or politically connected businessmen. So that gives us the freedom and independence to report on whatever we think should be reported. But having said that, I still do have to deal with political pressure. Like sometimes
What's the
someone may
political pressure that you face?
What kind of political
Yeah.
pressure? Well, sometimes, so we report primarily on the Ministry of Health, right?
Correct.
Since we report on health issues. But then we also report on other government ministries who are involved in health work as well. I mean, like, for example, when you talk about IP rights, that has got to do with International Trade and Industry Ministry. Or like when you talk about face mask ceiling prices, that's got to do with the domestic trade industry.
Yeah, same
Right.
goes with the. Remember the story of the hospital cleaner story in Ipoh?
Yeah.
That is also very interesting. I mean, most of the time people just don't bat an eye on them.
Yeah.
But their stories, and then most of us just realize that they get paid on a daily wage.
Yeah.
And they are the one of those that we tend to left out in the news just because there are a lot of political stories going on. But these are the stories I think that resonates with a lot of people.
Correct, yeah. So some of the pressure I face is like when someone doesn't like a particular headline, so you have to, it's about balancing, again, like I said. So sometimes I like, fine, I'll change a headline. That's okay. I can give in this one time. But there have also been times when they ask me to change a headline or a story, but I feel like the headline is fine as it is. It's accurate. There's nothing wrong about it. Then I ignore them and I just leave it as it is.
Yeah, stand by your story. I mean, most of the time, I think as journalists, we believe in our hunch. Our hunch is we believe that this story is of public interest.
Correct.
It's not for ourselves just because we have the byline on our own, but at the end of the day, the people deserve to know the truth.
Yeah, so I feel like I think the main lesson that I've learned, Norman, is that I can give in sometimes, but I don't give in all the time. And also, what was I going to say? Yeah, I don't give in all the time. So I will stand my ground, especially if I think that the story is important and shouldn't be meddled with. And I also take care to report both positive and any potentially negative news, So whatever good work the Ministry of Health has done, I always make sure that Code Blue reports on it, even though some of their work is not reported in other mainstream media, because mainstream media may not think that it's important enough, but I make sure that Code Blue highlights all the good things that MOH has done as well. Like when they released their National Health and Morbidity Survey 2020, we reported 12 stories from it, whereas mainstream media just reported like maybe the press statement.
And no follow-ups. So I would say Code Blue, it's the new kid on the block. It's the alternative independent media, right? So what is your advice to many aspiring young female and a lot of male journalists out there as well? I mean, things are really tough for media industry. So what's your advice?
It is. I understand. Yeah, the media industry has been tough. It's been tough on Code Blue as well during the COVID pandemic. So I know that even though readerships at Code Blue and I'm sure at a lot of other newsrooms just skyrocketed during the COVID pandemic, but that doesn't necessarily translate to increasing revenue. I think it's more like it dropped, ironically, despite the increase in readership, because marketing and advertising budgets dried up. But I think my one parting advice to young journalists is to not be afraid of reporting, because when you do this job, I think the one key attribute that you need is courage, because a lot of people are not going to like what you do. Most people hate journalists. Politicians have their own agenda when it comes to using the media, so you have to be prepared to face the fact that most people won't like you. They won't like the work that you do. They will always prefer to shoot the messenger, even if you're just reporting what a newsmaker said, and it may be something that you personally don't even agree with. but the authorities, people in power, regardless of their political allegiance. I mean, we have gone through now several administrations. Barisan, Code Blue was born during the Pakatan Harapan time, and now we have a new administration. So I can safely say that politicians across board, many of them, they do have their own agenda, and they typically only prefer that the media report whatever positive things that they do. They don't like public criticism, and they will take any criticism personally, even if we are just a messenger. So courage is the first attribute that you will need to have. And then secondly, of course, tenacity. You have to keep chasing stories that you believe in. You can't give up because it takes time. Stories that impact people, stories that are important, they do take time to develop. And even if those stories may not be so-called viral, but it doesn't mean that they're not important. And as long as the right people see it and hopefully change policies because of your story, then it's really all worth it.
On this point, if let's say, if someone would like to donate or invest in Code Blue, I would say invest in journalism, invest in the good work in Code Blue. How can they do that?
Okay, they can email codeblue, that's CODEBLUE, at galencenter.org.
So there's a lot of good work, and two things where Su-Lyn has mentioned: courage and tenacity. And with that really summarizes very well on today's show. And it is a pleasure having you on the show, and I wish you all the best in leading Code Blue and bringing us compelling stories and uncovering truth to the public. Thank you so much, Su-Lyn.
Thanks, Norman.
And you are listening to Bicara Minggu Ini, uncovering current affairs and politics. And you can listen to the stories and interviews on Spotify, Anchor, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts and iTunes. For more updates and stories, if you have any suggestions, you can tweet to me at I'mNongo. And this is Bicara Minggu Ini, this week on a special series, Malaysian Women in Journalism.